So, in the early 2000s, when I didn't currently have internet, there was not a lot of ways to look back on the history of different game companies once I started to get more into that. The thing that really opened the door for me of looking back on the history of something was Disney's Epic Mickey. And that really opened the door for me as in terms of just looking back in things that I really didn't know a whole lot about. Due to me not having internet, my greatest source of information would be going to my library and trying to find books on information. So I would be looking up books on Godzilla, Disney, and sooner or later, I stumbled across this book. Super Mario, How Nintendo Conquered America. This is the second reissue of the novel. This includes a brand new chapter, as well as it's a soft cover compared to the hardcover, and it had a pixelized Mario on the front of it, if I remember correctly. This is something that I'll always kind of treasure because it's something that I was pretty young, and it got me really interested in looking back even more so on the history of businesses and just how things are created in industries. So, for example, Super Mario, this book right here, this book does a really nice job, in my opinion, of really going through the history of Nintendo from their start when they were working with cards and toys, and then their slow evolving ways into the video game industry with the arcade games such as Radar Scope or Donkey Kong, and then slowly how they got into things like with the NES and how it affected people, really. There are a few minor nitpicks that I can look at nowadays. Back in the day, I didn't really know, but there are misspellings in this book. I think it's self-published, so maybe that's the reason, but it has some misspellings of character names, not the biggest deal in the world. But then there are really weird things that the author really quotes here, like he might say a game is a sequel to another game when in reality, it's not. I think there's one part where he quotes Super Paper Mario as being a pseudo sequel to New Super Mario Brothers, which really made no sense. There's just a few little minor nitpicks like that in this book. For the most part, I think it really categorizes Nintendo's history. And for myself, this was really amazing to see when I was a kid, to really pick apart the history of Nintendo, to really go through how they started to the Wii U, which is what the new chapter included. Back when the first publication, the book ended with basically on a high note where Nintendo was booming success with the Wii, and so to speak. And with the new chapter, it basically goes out on a limb saying, well, we don't know what Nintendo will be up to next due to the 3DS coming out and it kind of flopping at the time. When it first was released, and then with the Wii U on the horizon, and people really didn't know what to make out of that as well. So the second version of the novel really ends on a somber tone. But it's kind of interesting. I mean, it's definitely an interesting read. It doesn't just go over, oh, Nintendo made this game and then they went to this game. It really goes over people's thoughts and emotions of the time. So for instance, when Super Mario Brothers was released, or the NES, how did that compare to Atari or Sega's offering, and how it was so different? They go over other games such as The Legend of Zelda, Metroid, Earthbound has a very big section in this. Things like Luigi's Mansion, how that being the GameCube's launch game of Mario, how people were really affected by that. Same thing with things like the Wind Waker, when that was released, how people thought the art style was so appalling at the time. It also tends to go over other subjects which I find pretty fascinating as well, such as Shigeru Miyamoto and how he would design games. It also goes over the rise of Xbox at the time when Xbox was still doing their 360 and the Xbox One was just starting to be announced, and little bits and details were coming out at the time. Stuff with PlayStation, how they were partnering with Nintendo at the time to develop the CDI add-on for the Super Nintendo, but then that fell through, and you get their biggest rival, PlayStation. I would say for a book that comes in at over 300 pages long, it does a very nice job at condensing and making sure you get all the important stuff. So how the Super Nintendo was developed, how the N64 was developed, the GameCube, the Wii, the DS, how handheld gaming was so important, the console wars between Sega and Nintendo. All of that is in this book. How Mario was developed, how it was influenced in other games going forward, the rise of indie games in the early 2000s, just everything that you could probably think of being about video games is in this book. It's not solely about how Nintendo conquered America. I think that title is a little off just because of how much more information it goes over. It's not just Nintendo. Nintendo is the main focus, but there's so much other information. This is just a book that I highly recommend.